out that Jeff and several of the professors here were using our Lead Like Jesus material. And they were talking about what it would look like if you actually brought servant leadership into whatever area you were going to do in your life. And in the conversation, Jeff said, we are using examples like Cardone Industries and Synovus and, organizations like that. And I said, awesome. I said, Michael Cardone and Jimmy Blanchard, are on our Lead Like Jesus board. And he said, would it be possible to have them come and talk at Anderson University? And at that point, I had no idea if that would be possible. But all things are possible with God. And so God has worked this day out perfectly. So it's an awesome privilege to be here. And what I heard from Anderson University and from your dean, too, was that Anderson is a place that's serious about faith, about education, and about life work. And it intersects in this place. So this is an awesome, awesome opportunity for Anderson University and for Lead Like Jesus to spread a message and to make a difference, impact for people, not only here in Anderson, South Carolina, but people around the world. So I want us to do something as we start out this morning, and listen carefully, because it's important to listen carefully when you get instructions, and you all would know that. But I want you to stand up. Number one, stand up. And I'd love for you to walk around, and I want you to greet each other, because some of you don't know each other, and so we want to greet each other this morning. But this morning, first of all, I'd love for you to greet each other in a very special way. Greet each other like you're looking for someone else more important. Okay? So greet each other like you're looking for someone else more important. Go ahead. Greet each other.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were somebody. You know that story about the man that was in the cigar store and he bumped into the wooden Indian, and he bumped in and he looked around and went, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were somebody."
Okay, and stop where you are. Stop wherever you are. Stop wherever you are. Okay, next assignment. Now, I want you to greet each other very differently. I want you to greet each other as if you've just seen a long-lost friend. Go ahead.
Yes. I heard you. He's not here.
Thank you so much. Find your seat. Okay. Now, why in the world did we do that? When you think about what we did the same activity, didn't we? We were greeting each other, right? So we were greeting each other, but the first time we greeted each other as if we were looking for someone else more important, and the second time as if we had found a long-lost friend. We had a different perspective, right? Same activity, but which activity created more energy in the room? The first or second? Second. Significantly more. I didn't tell you all what to do. I gave you no instructions except to greet each other. And when you greeted each other the first time, there was very, very little eye contact, very little conversation. But the second time, you were excited about each other. You were excited about what was going on, and all we changed was perspective. So today we're going to be talking about leadership, maybe from a different perspective, maybe from a different way that you have thought about leadership before. But I want you to catch that this perspective is an important perspective for you to have around leadership. At Lead Like Jesus, we have 4 things that you will find in every piece of material that we have and every training that we do. We believe, number 1, that Jesus is the greatest leadership role model of all time, the greatest. And if you took a lens and just focused in on Jesus as a leader, you would see the greatest leader of all time. He had vision that was given to him by his Father. When you think about leaders, leaders have great vision. Jesus came to redeem a broken world. There's never been a greater vision than that one. And then Jesus knew how to build a team, remember? He took, I'll just say, 12 kind of incompetent, inexperienced guys. None of us would have hired those people. But Jesus took them and he turned them into an incredible team. He mentored, he coached, he redirected, he did every single thing necessary to build a team. And now 2,000 plus years later, we have absolutely all evidence that he has more leaders than any leader has ever had. He's the greatest leadership role model of all time. So what can we do to follow him? Secondly, we believe leadership happens anytime you are engaged in influencing the thinking, behavior, or development of another person. How many of you in this room would say that you are a leader? The definition is the influence, thinking, behavior, or development of another. I met a young mom this last week, and she said, I know that I'm a developer of people. Praise the Lord. She's a developer of people. She has 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-old in her home. Oh, my word. She's developing people. And so wherever you are influencing the people in your life. Thirdly, we believe that effective leadership starts on the inside, beginning with the heart. And I would say to you, a heart deeply connected to the Father, as Jesus modeled when he was on earth. And lastly, our topic for today, much of this topic is we believe that servant leadership is the only approach to leadership that Jesus ever validated for his followers. And so as followers, that we are talking about servant leadership, not as a philosophy, so let's be clear. This is not a philosophy to get people to do what I want them to do. This is an overflow of a heart that understands that service comes from a heart of service and a heart that has established love as its core value. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Lead Like Jesus comes into faith-based nonprofits, faith-based for-profits, universities. Sometimes we work with all denominations. And we do one thing. We want to transform their world by teaching them what it looks like to lead like Jesus. And when we talk about their world, we're talking about their culture, and we're talking about their community. So that may be their community of clients, that may be students, that may be boards, but we want to transform their culture and their community. So that's what we do. And Jeff has asked me to teach on our first core principle, because we know that if the heart is not right, nothing else will work right. We have 4 areas that we normally cover in Lead Like Jesus. The first one is the heart, which is our intention, our motivation of why we do what we do. You know, we can do right things with wrong motivation, and we all know that clearly that is not what God instructs. That he was very clear about everything being with the heart. He looked at the heart. And so we always look at the heart first. Secondly, we look at the head, which is, what do you believe about leading and motivating people? What does that look like? What are your beliefs around leadership? Thirdly, we talk about the hands, which is our behavior. And so if our heart's different and our thinking's different, then the next thing is that our behavior is going to be different, right? Should be. And then lastly is the habits. And so we connect on what are the things that we are doing to make this connection that is constant with our Father, our Heavenly Father. But today, we're going to talk about the heart. So you have in your handout, a sheet that looks like this. It's called Edging God Out. I'd like for you to take notes on this sheet if you would, but this is a core concept of Lead Like Jesus. And throughout the day-to-days, we're going to do this core concept right now, and the rest of the day and tomorrow you're going to spend talking about the practical application of what this looks like in your life and in your work, okay? You ready? When you look at the top part of this diagram, there are three, what we believe are core beliefs. The first core belief is that God is the object of our worship. What are other things that we worship? What are other things that you might worship? Just shout out to me.
Money.
Money. What else?
Career.
Career.
Mirror.
Your mirror. Your mirror. What else? Family.
Security.
Image. Security. So there's so many things that we could put in the place as the object of our worship, things that put other things before God. And what we know is that when we get that in the wrong place, that things begin to happen. And so we know that, number one, God is the object of our worship, and He is first in our life. And I would say to you is that the rest of that sentence is that our lives are worship back to Him. Ephesians 2:10. This is core belief, is that in this belief that we are saying that we are God's workmanship, and that everything that He has built into us, He did that for the work that He has prepared for us to do ahead of time, right? And so that's a number one belief. Secondly, we believe that God is the source of our security and self-worth. And I would add one more word, and wisdom. God is the source of our security, self-worth, and wisdom. What else could be our source? What else could we put as our source instead of God? Education. Yes. What else?
Wealth.
Wealth. Yes. Culture. There's a great quote from Robert S. McGee in his book, In Search for Significance. He said if Satan had a formula for self-worth, it would be self-worth equals performance plus the opinion of others. Isn't that good? Self-worth equals performance plus the opinion of others. And so many times our self-worth is about our performance. How many of you know that you perform at 100% every day? Probably not. How many of you think that people are fickle? And so some days their opinions are great and other days they're not. And so if we're dependent with our security and self-worth with others, we're going to be in trouble. God is the source of our security, self-worth, and wisdom. And lastly, the third belief is that God is our audience and our ultimate authority. When you think about, who are you playing your life to? Who are you playing to? You're on stage. How are you living your life? Who's your audience? God is the one audience. Well, these core beliefs, these three core beliefs are so central because what we've learned is that there are barriers to being a servant leader. And those barriers show up every time when these get out of alignment. And they show up as pride and as fear. And I tell you, I've been with Lead Like Jesus now almost 13 years. And if I'm really transparent before the Lord, with every challenge I have, if I look deep enough, I will find there's pride or fear, or both, in the middle of it. Pride or fear. Pride, we all recognize pride in others, don't we? And sometimes the more prideful we are, the less we'll ever see it in ourselves. But pride is that thinking more of yourself than we ought. It's any time. In fact, a good key is when you start to think more than your thoughts. I'm more educated. I have more experience. I have written more books. I have more articles out. I'm more than somebody else. When we start to compare ourselves in that way, then there's probably pride lurking very close. So on the other side of that is fear. And fear is that place that keeps us from doing the things that God has called us to do sometimes. It's that place where we know that we're thinking less than thoughts. I'm less than prepared. I'm less educated. I've not done this before. I have less experience than that other person, so I'll just let them do it. And so we're underestimating the gifts that we have. But what we've come to is that when we know that in humility, that every gift that we have, every talent, every experience we have, is that passes through us. It doesn't come from us. It's a gift from God, and we use it for Him. And in fear, we know 1 John 4:18 says that perfect love casts out fear, and that God is that perfect love. So when you think about pride and fear, those are the things that grab us up, that keep us from being all the things that God would have us be. And every time you see pride and fear, you will realize that it will distort your thinking. It's always comparative, and it will always separate you from yourself. It separates you from God, and it will separate you from others. Because you're always looking more than or less than. You're always trying to find that path. Have you ever tried to give feedback to a fearful leader? Have you? Do you know what that's like? Our co-founder of our ministry is Ken Blanchard, and Ken says that feedback is the breakfast of champions. I agree. But what happens when you have a leader that is fearful is that they are so busy protecting themselves that they don't want to hear your feedback. They don't want to hear what's wrong. And their greatest fear is that you don't want them to be leader anymore. And so when you think about pride and fear and how those two things show up in our world almost every day in your life and in mine, and what that keeps us from being is a servant leader. And so now that you know this, you can't stop knowing it. And that means that for the rest of today and tomorrow, we're going to be talking about what this looks like, how this applies in your life. And so hold on to this teaching, and let's see what we can learn in the next 2 days.